Do you ever wonder how the artists you most like achieve that wide, immersive stereo sound? In today's video, I'm gonna share with you 7 tips on how to exactly achieve the results that you wish for. And I'm not only gonna talk about them, but I will show them right in practice how I apply them and how they actually sound like. Now to start off, I want you to know that only hearing about these techniques doesn't actually help you to enhance your mixes. You also have to apply them, and it requires practice to know in which situation you can use which technique. So it can help if you maybe just pause the video at some point and just try it out, or write it down somewhere so you can remember it when you're mixing or producing the next time. So with that said, let's dive right into it, and let me share with you my first tip, which is to double track recordings and pan them hard left and right. This works especially good if you're working with guitars or vocals, but it can potentially work with any instrument. The goal is to record the same part twice and place it on each side of the stereo spectrum. So let me show it to you with this guitar right here. I'm gonna record this guitar now with a condenser mic, which is in mono. So as you can hear, the guitar is recorded in mono, and you can now of course place it somewhere in the stereo spectrum, but it will still be narrow because it's still a mono source. So now let's record the guitar a second time. So now we recorded the same part twice, and what we can do now is pan it to the very left and to the very right. And when we now play it, it just sounds way fuller and wider compared to when I only play one channel in the middle. With this technique, we're taking advantage of the difference in dynamics and timing of my guitar playing. If I would take the same recording twice, it would end up in the middle again. But like that, there are slight differences, like the direction and the distance to the microphone and the way I hit the different strings. This all flows into how the recording will sound like in the end. The second method that I have for you is a technique that takes advantage of psychoacoustic. It's a method that tricks your brain into perceiving the sound as wider. And what I'm talking about is the Haas Effect. With this effect, you can take a signal that is in mono, like the guitar I recorded for example, and place a delay on the channel. Now, you have to set the delay to fully wet and adjust the left and right delay, so they are about 10 to 20 milliseconds apart from each other. So I will set the left channel to 1 millisecond and the right channel to, let's say, about 12 milliseconds. The feedback you can pull back to 0%. When you now play it, the signal goes first through the left channel and after 12 milliseconds through the right channel. And this creates the feeling that the sound became wider. Here's without the delay. Now what I have to say is that this effect is also a bit controversial, because it can start to sound bad when you later fold your sound again into mono. So I would personally always check if it sounds good in mono, because what can happen is that some frequencies can start to cancel each other out. So don't throw it on every individual channel. I mostly use it for instruments that are in the higher frequency range. Sometimes I also like to use the Ableton utility plugin after the Haas effect to pull back the stereo field again a little bit. I can also really recommend to start working with a phase correlation meter. I personally use the correlation meter that's integrated into the RME interface that I'm using. But I also really like the free plugin by Voxengo called Span. It's an analyzer, and it's the best if you just put it on your master channel and always keep an eye on it a little bit. So this is how the Span analyzer by Voxengo looks like. I have it now on my master channel, and if I play back the guitar now without the Haas effect, it's in mono. And down here you have the correlation meter, which gives me now the value of 1 always. And the value of 1 means basically that you have a correlation of 100%. That means that the left and the right channel are basically the same, which means that it's mono. If we turn on now the Haas effect again, we see that it's bouncing around somewhere around 0. Sometimes it's in negative, sometimes it's in the positive. And what 0 means is basically that the left and the right channel are completely different from each other. And this is basically how you get the widest stereo field. Now everything below 0 is bad, because that means that you have phase cancellation going on. And that's why I told you before that you should only use the Haas effect on higher frequencies, because then you don't have so much phase cancellation going on most of the time. What the value of -1 would mean is that you have complete phase cancellation, that the left and the right channel would completely cancel each other out if you would fold them into mono. So I can also show you how this would look like if I just duplicate my channel of this guitar recording and I turn off the Haas effect on both of the channels. And now I will pan one channel to the left and one channel to the right. And on my right channel, I will switch the phase by 180 degrees. And when you now play them together, you get basically -1. And if you put now a utility plugin on the master channel and put this to mono, then you have nothing. You don't hear anything anymore. And that's the worst case. So always keep an eye on the correlation meter if you're working with stereo sources or any sort of stereo effects. If you are already using the Haas effect in your mixdowns, I would be curious to know what you think about it, so let me know in the comments below. The next tip that I have for you is quite common, and you can get really creative with it, and that is to use reverb on your channels. A reverb can really help you to get that spatial feeling of depth and width. I always create different return channels with different reverbs on it. For drums, I like to have one main room with a decay time of around 0.2 seconds. And here's without the reverb. The cool thing about return channels is that you can separately process the signal on the return channel. So you can, for example, say, let's cut everything below 300 Hz on that reverb. Or you can also sidechain compress your room with the kick drum as the sidechain input. Which basically helps the kick drum to punch through even more. Maybe also try to create one really long reverb and then set it to mono. Now if you send this percussion loop into this reverb channel, this effect sounds really nice because you can get really a lot of depth with it. The reverb doesn't really clutter your stereo signal, so you have this feeling of deepness and three-dimensionality with that. Now the tip that I'm about to share with you is one that I've overlooked for a long time, especially when I started out, but it's actually quite amazing what you can do with it, and that is to use mid-side EQ'ing. For this you need some sort of multiband equalizer which lets you switch between stereo placement modes. I personally really like the FabFilter Pro Q3, but you can use any equalizer that you like. In the Pro Q3 you have 5 different modes, and the standard mode is always stereo. So when you make a cutoff, for example, everything below this frequency right here gets cut off. Now if you change it to mid mode, for example, now you would cut off only the mid frequencies, or if you change it to side, everything on the side gets cut off and everything on the middle still remains as it is. Now mid-side EQing only works if you have a signal that already has some stereo width on it. For example, I have this pad right here. Let's turn off the equalizer again. Now this pad is already in stereo, and what you can do now is, for example, cut off the sides a little bit and boost it a little bit in the higher frequencies. This boost right here is only audible in the sides. That means everything in the middle remains as it is, and only the sides are getting affected by this. I always try to cut off a little bit of the sides in the deeper frequencies and try to add some in the higher frequencies. Now you can also do that with saturation or any other form of boosting, but this is just one way how you can use it with mid-side EQing, for example. The fifth method that I have for you is probably the most popular method, and that is to use a stereo imaging plugin. I personally like to use the Stereo Maker by Brainworks, which costs around $100, but I also really like the free Ozone Imager 2 plugin by iZotope. On the Ozone Imager 2, you essentially have two different modes. Mode number 1 takes advantage of the Haas Effect, which I already talked about in tip number 2. And mode number 2 is a form of velvet noise decorrelation, which basically adds noise to the signal and slightly alters it on the left and on the right channel to create a more stereo enhanced signal. Sometimes I also like to split the signal, so the stereo imager only gets affected by the higher frequencies. In Ableton, how you do it is you put the effect in a group and then go to the chain list right here and create a new chain list. And now you put a auto filter on both chains. And now on the chain with the Ozone Imager on it, you can make a low cut at around 400 Hz. And on the chain with nothing on it except for the auto filter, you do the same 400 Hz, but you do a high cut filter. And now you basically have all the high frequencies going through the Ozone Imager, and everything below 400 Hz doesn't get affected by the Ozone Imager at all. What you can do now is also use the macro knobs. So you assign the frequencies of both filters to macro 1. And now you can change the frequency of both the filters with one knob. And like that, you will have less muddy sounds in the lower frequencies because they still stay in the middle. Method number 6 to achieve a wider stereo mix is actually to automate the stereo width and only make it really wide in certain parts of the song. So for example, only in the chorus or at the peak of your song. Changes in stereo width can actually really have a big impact because you sometimes only notice that something is wide if it was narrow before. Which brings me now already to the last method that I want to share with you, and that is to actually use mono signals in your mix and leave them in the center as they are. This again deepens the contrast between stereo signals, very wide signals, and mono signals that are only in the middle. Because if everything is wide, then nothing is wide. And it gets actually really tiring over the course of a whole song if you only hear very wide signals the whole time. So with all the tips that I gave you now, be selective and purposeful on where to actually use them in your mix. A mono sound can be as exciting as a wide sound if you introduce it right. So these are already my 7 tips. If you liked the video, I would be very happy if you subscribe to my channel and like the video to also receive more mixing tips like this in the future. And also make sure to check out my channel for other videos like this one. Have a nice day. Thanks for watching.